The purpose of these location-specific videos is not really to give you a history on the area. Many of these locations I know very little about. What I'm trying to do is show you the visuals of what I consider to be old world architecture in that region. And yes, I do like to quote from sources like Wikipedia, but really it's to explain to you how ridiculous the narrative sounds when we look a little further into these locations. So this video we're looking at Albany. You can see here it's the state capital city in the state of New York. Not a very large city either. And you can see here less than 100,000, and even in the modern day we're looking at just around 100,000. But nevertheless it becomes the capital of the state of New York. And as we go through these old videos, I want you to take a look at the age of the areas that we're looking at. You can see here the maybe brick and stone, large stone paved together, and then you have a covering of dirt. So what most of us have always thought was streets of dirt are actually cobbled covered streets, with the tram cars, of course, and all of that as a part of it. But remember, a city of 100,000 people at the turn of the century. So as we go through the architecture, you're going to see a lot of this heavy stone and what you might call bulgy architecture, really frivolous and extravagant, not really indicative of what we're told about the 19th century and the struggle to get on their feet as a civilization. The Academy for Boys. Why on earth would you add this? I mean, you have to operate under the assumption that either all these philanthropists and community developers were so deep-pocketed that they were able and willing to construct in such a manner to have everything so over the top and ornate that it was such an important part of their philosophy. I mean that's the expectation here if we're going to take the historical narrative at face value. The Albany Trust Building. So many of these old banks are spectacular and heavily decorated, of course. There's a texture and a weight to these old world structures that we lost somewhere along the way. And I don't know if the transition from the old world to the new world is really cut and dry. I think this is a process. I think this process is continuing, actually. And what the hopes of the controllers is that we completely forget about all of this and we shrug it off to something we can't really explain about the 1800s. We move forward and we just accept this as progress. That's what they want from us, and I absolutely refuse to give that to them. And it's just not just my knowledge of the building process, but it's my love and appreciation for art and humanity that keeps me doing this. And it tells me that what we're looking at and what we're being told are two different stories. That was the armory. This is supposedly another armory in Albany. So many of these massive structures are ghosts to time, really. For instance, the National Savings Bank. Very difficult to find pictures of this one, even though it survived into the 70s. But the classic Romanesque styling. I don't know, Romanesque maybe not the right word. Roman styling. You can imagine there had to be some sort of reason why they would tear this down. If not to erase the past, then what? Progress. All in the name of progress. Another National Savings Bank, and yet another National Savings Bank. Here you can see as well. So quite absurd, really, when you think about it. It seems like there's a struggle to keep the narrative consistent. It's a telephone building, built in 1911, we're told. Nice looking structure with the mansard-style dormer roof. Dormers poking out of the mansard there. You can very ornate. Again, the top is finished with the most flair. something that we see repeated in these old world structures. 1911. And this is remember that time period, very early in the industrial age as far as the building equipment to build goes. You look at any of the videos from that era and you see paltry cranes and excavators and things like that. It's very much in the early stages, yet they have no trouble putting up these multi-storied structures. I was reading a comment today on one of my videos, and the lady mentioned the legislative building in Victoria, British Columbia. If you haven't seen that, well, here it is. Apparently history says it took 4 years to construct that. And then she said she was on a tour in that structure recently and asked the tour guide if he really thinks it took 4 years to construct that. And he jokingly looked at her apparently and said, no, it took 2 years because they had steam cranes back then. That was his response to her. I thought it was interesting. To me, it feels like a panic. So this is an interesting one too. The All Saints Cathedral, I don't know if it ever looked like this, or if it did look like this and it was scaled back, kind of reminding me of the State Capitol building, which we'll be looking at shortly too, because this is the All Saints Cathedral as it is in the modern day. We have another drawing of it. So the inconsistencies abound, and I've seen that before in other locations where the cathedrals of the 1800s were much more magnificent, and they have actually been scaled back. Here's an interior look at that. And if I showed you this and you didn't know, you might think we were in France or something like that. But we're in Albany, and you can see here the chairs. Certainly not a part of the original intention of this place. This looks like an afterthought to me. And there it is in the modern day. Pretty spectacular for a city of 100,000 people, less than 100,000 people at the time. But it was the state capital, so I guess they had the ability to do anything. We have another cathedral. 4-year build time. Immaculate Conception Cathedral. Again, a very early time period, 1848, they're building this structure. There's a bit of a look at what it looks like today, with all the little nodules coming down the peak here. Part of the energetics of the system is what we hypothesize in this research community. And a quick look at the interior. Now, can you picture the builders of the mid-1800s, 1850, 1851, getting close to completion, and they're putting the finishing touches on the interior of this cathedral, and walking away in 1852 having it look like this, going back to their shacks by the river, by the canal, or whatever it may be. It's a difficult picture to reconcile, I find. The people that put this together, living in a semi-state of poverty as construction hands, hired hands, right? It's all in the architect. The architect does all the heavy lifting, right? In the drawing. I've said this many times, but you need an entire workforce capable of producing magnificent work to pull this type of stuff off. In Albany, having some interesting roots in the American history. We have a steamboat line between Albany and New York coming in 1807. And we have, by 1810, Albany has a population of just over 10,000 people, which would have put it in as the 10th largest urban center in the nation at the time in 1810. We have another church here. There's no shortage of churches in so many of these towns. Again, a very early narrative on this one. This one they're giving us 17 years on the build time for St. Peter's Episcopal Church. And a bit of a landmark in that central square area close to the State House. And you can see the level of construction on this thing as well is looking very much old world. Not something that we would duplicate here in the modern day. And more churches for you, again with the columns and the dome. The architecture repeats itself. And Albany also produces a Joseph Henry, widely regarded as the foremost American scientist of the 19th century, for his creation of the electric motor, the first electric motor. Interesting. That gentleman goes on to become the secretary of the Smithsonian, so got a Smithsonian investigation coming up soon here on the channel. This is the old City Hall. This is the next City Hall. Somewhat famous structure, as it is one of the famous early designs of H.H. Richardson. And I've done quite a bit of investigating into that gentleman here on this channel. Matthew Smith from Marvelous Old World and I had a good conversation about that. I'll link that in the description. Looking like he's more of a cover story and that his name has been put on a lot of Old World structures. A placeholder, like we see so often in this Old World research. You really have to picture the workforces that would have been available to build like this at the time. And, well, I mean, picture your town in the modern day. If you live in a city close to 100,000 people, I mean, can you see them putting buildings like this up in your area? Even if money wasn't a problem, would they be able to muster the workforce to get the contractors on board with it? Here we have the City Savings Bank, 1901. 1902, 2-year build time on this sucker. Looking very out of place, looking absolutely ridiculous. And you can see down at the bottom we have that sloping, indicative of some sort of regrading that went on somewhere along the way. County Courthouse. Nothing too spectacular, looking like one of those blockish government-style buildings, sometimes reserved to be federal buildings. Post offices. In this case, we're looking at a county courthouse, and a quick look at the interior. You can see the marble and the high quality building materials that were so commonplace in that early time period. County Savings Bank, made out of stone. And this apparently is what's known as the D&A building. Sorry, D&H, my mistake. 4-year build time on this one. This one is absolutely incredible, and surprisingly, maybe not surprisingly, not that easy to find a lot of pictures on that. I had to do some searching. Here's a modern day look at it. Not the best photo. Apologies if it's a little bit blurry, but this is showing you how ornate a lot of this really is. And really not making a lot of sense for that 1914 to 1918 timeline. Although they do give us a construction photo to ease our minds. So this is 1917. This is supposed to be completed in 1918, but they're still not done the exterior, so there's going to be a lot of interior finish to go from this time to 1918, which again makes me question the narrative. I have doubts, of course. And why would they make it look like a cathedral, you have to ask yourself. Is it that, or is it that cathedrals are all part of this same old world architecture? We have an early observatory, an executive mansion, and a flood, the Albany flood. And this one going back to 1913, we are told so many places suffering from floods and things of this manner at that time period. So resetting of the narrative is my suggestion. We have the Governor Smith office building completed in 1928. That's about all you're going to get on that. And of course still stands in a massive structure, but again having a bit of decoration, which reminds us of the old world. Interesting looking structure, and this is some of the ceiling area on the interior. You have to wonder, I mean, could these have been put on after the fact? Very, very interesting, nice-looking building. Governor Alfred Smith himself here out front, with what looks like a fasces. And some have hypothesized that this is one of the weapons that were used to destroy much of the old world. And there's that mansion we looked at earlier, a little bit clearer for us here. That would be the same governor. That would be his residence. The Grand Movie Theater. Of course, they cover them all up with these billboards, but you can still see how ornate it is. And the hospital buildings. This is a nice looking street scene from the early part of the century. This is the Hotel Hampton right here. We're featuring definitely old world looking. You can see all the buildings again attached so nicely with the nice facades in these downtowns. The Ten Eyck Hotel. Also the Ten Eyck Hotel. Two of them. Two generations, they'll tell us. Maybe they'll tell us it built on top. I don't really know. The new Kenmore Hotel. There's a better look at that one right there. This one again is showing us the streets, the state of the streets. And very solid construction looking there. Hotel DeWitt Clinton. Rather large structure. Not much information on this one. Now I don't have a date on this photograph. It says early 1900s, and you can see the structure, the D&H structure that we looked at earlier, which was completed in 1918, firmly intact here. And that would be a very new structure at that time, according to the historical narrative. You also see some nice detail over here. And that would be that National Savings Bank, and we also have a commercial bank here. So much trouble to go to store your money. Okay, we'll keep going, getting to that National Savings Bank that we looked at before. Again, just a bit of a better look for you, and this looking very awkward relative to the front face of the building. You'd think if you were the building designer and you knew that the grading was like this. This looks like the main entrance. Why wouldn't you put the main entrance down here where the street is flat? Instead they put it here where there's this big slope, so you walk out and all of a sudden you're on a pretty steep slope. Seems a bit silly if you ask me. The old State Hall covered in trees. I always find that funny again, why there are postcards with foliage covering the structure you're trying to feature. And now we get to Albany Post Office, 4-year construction time, 1879 to 1883. And again, a nice looking structure as well. And this is an interesting part of the early buildings as well, with all the awnings on there. Like that was their solution to keep the sun out and keep it dim on the inside. It must have been quite dim actually, keeping a lot of that sunlight out. Interesting feature on the building, certainly not anything we do here in the modern day with blinds and all the rest of it. You have, of course, the streetcars and the horse and buggies, all looking very familiar now in this old world research. The Sacred Heart Convent. Wow. It must have been a couple of sisters that got together, had this built for the glory of God. It still stands. You can see it there in the modern day. That's a better look at it. And we'll get a little closer just to, again, maybe you would call Gothic styling, but really it's the old world architecture. A high school done in a similar manner. Another high school, the New Albany High School Annex. This is course, they have to put the bell towers on all the annexes, right? What's going on in the streets down here, too? Are they supposed to be snow hills, dirt? Not sure exactly. Another high school. They had to get everybody ready to accept the narrative, the new narrative, accept the world as they wanted us to see it. And this would be that high school there. We'll go back to this one. Again, you can see the brick paved streets and massive columns. Again, you remember the population of the city. Not a large city, never really becoming a large city, but apparently warranted this type of architecture. And yet another school, looking a bit like a church, with two hexagonal domes possibly on the side, but no, it's a school. The Stanwix Hall with a rather large dome. A very early photograph, this one. Now we come to the Capitol building. Now this one has a 33-year build time, passing through the hands of several architects, including H.H. Richardson, the placeholder, and apparently one of the same architects built the Canadian Parliament buildings in Ottawa. But you can see here we got a postcard. The postcard doesn't even really say it's a depiction of what it was supposed to be. It's just depicting it as this, but that's not how it looks. This is how it looks in the modern day. So this again goes back to what I was talking about with the church. And we have these early depictions of different looking structures, and they'll tell us that a lot of the time that these were just what the design was, but what they eventually went with after the 32 years, or whatever it is, 33 years. 33 years? This is eventually what it ended up looking like. So I suspect there's been some fishy business going on here. This is a spectacular building. It's a famous stairwell with, again, 1800s construction. This is the types of stuff that they were able to pull off, apparently, at that time in Albany. Quite incredible. I really find it interesting as well that we see so many of these skylight areas in a lot of these old world structures, such as arcades and Capitol buildings and things of that nature. Not an easy feat to accomplish. Certainly in the 1800s, a very, very difficult feat according to the narrative we've been fed. Also very difficult is the stone and tile work here in the ceiling areas. Take a look at the way that these tiles weave into each other. That's very, very extravagant or ornate. I don't know what to say. I keep using these same adjectives, but I think you get my point. This is another spectacular area in that building. And I think they'll tell us that this is a construction photo, but I think these guys know there's no construction going on here. Maybe this part here, this little shelter. At least they put the brace on there. They've scabbed it together, they braced it this way, they braced it that, and then they put a bit of a roof on. They'll say that was the construction quarters and that they're working on it. I don't know. Maybe they're doing that retrofit. But I think repurposed. Pretty amazing, the stairs, everything here, several different layers, levels. The New York State Capitol. If you get a chance to go check this out, I certainly recommend you do. Just the quality itself of the building materials. Again, that just screams 1800s at you right there. Polished granite column for you. Take a look at the way that the column meets with the structure in the roof. That's very unique, very interesting. Another area in there with the curved painted ceilings, because it's a state capital. It's New York, damn it. It's got to be beautiful, even in this city of 100,000 people. Quite extravagant, isn't it? And moving on to the State College for Teachers. This is where you're going to teach the teachers what to teach. You have to have a place to do that, so we can set the narrative. If you think about it, the timeline really makes sense for a lot of this stuff. None of this really gets starting to happen until mid to late 1800s. When I say this, I'm talking about the education system. I'm talking about the structure of our society. They really did just lay it out for us. It still is there in the narrative they give to us. They've sugar-coated it, they've hidden certain things, but it's still there. We can see it quite clearly if we want to. This the state education building. This one will certainly give you an education. Built in 1908 to 1911, 3 years. Take a look at how massive that is. See how small the people are here? And you can see there's a lower level down here. You can see it working its way down there, and then you have full level over here. And I guess since it's the state education building, that'll be the acceptable excuse for building a structure like this in this town. And we'll take a look at those columns a little closer here in the modern day, and you can actually get a sense of how absolutely absurd the detailing is in the underside of here. And you think the interior is just a basic empty space, you'd be wrong. You're getting the type of herringbone dome construction. Who was doing this? Whose great-grandpa was building the Albany education, or the state education building from New York? Raise your hand. Anyone out there? Let me know. Again, we're getting similar patterning with the stonework here. Absolutely incredible, incredible work. I'm not sure what they're trying to depict here. What do you think? Education building. We have the owls watching over the children. And we have a really horrible construction photo, just to get you off the scent, as they say. This is the best they could provide for us, apparently. It almost looks like a cartoon, that's me. 1910, though. This again, gotcha. So this again would be, we have a 3-year time period, and where they're showing us this in 1910, that means it's only got 1 year left to go to complete this. And I just showed you the interior of this place, and I showed you the exterior as well. None of that is in place here, and they've got about a year, maybe a year and a half tops to finish that. So, you know what I'm calling? Couldn't find this church over here. If anyone knows anything any more about that, let me know in the comments section. It's the market. And of course they had the Union Station. A 2-year build time on that, because it was easy back then. There's a quick look at the interior. All of you ceiling finishers out there, eat your heart out. You have a very short window of time to complete the coffered ceiling in here. There's what it looks like in the modern day. Take a look at how perfect the floors are. Absolutely perfect. And what are we being shown here? Well, first we have the 4 eyes for 4 on the Roman clock, and telling us that there's something different about that. We were taught, I know I was taught, there's an IV with 4 in Roman numerals. And of course they give us a date. Thanks for telling us, folks. This has been Albany, New York. Thank you for being here.